Welcome back to the Convo Couch, ladies and gentlemen. I am Pastor Jardula, and today I have a special guest. Today with us, I have David Atkins. David Atkins is a Region 10 Director for the CDP, covering Assembly Districts 35, 37, 38, and 44. He is a regular contributor at the Washington Monthly with bylines at American Prospect, Rolling Stone, Salon, and elsewhere. He is also the president of the Pollux Group. And I have to mention, he's also the vice chair of the Santa Barbara Democratic Party. And to me, he was one of the most influential members of the credential committees that we just saw at the KDEM election in San Francisco. David, thank you for taking the interview.
Happy to be here.
Well, I have one question right off the bat, and I just want to give it to you. Were the elections in Assembly District 63 fair or unfair?
That is a difficult and complicated question to answer. But first, I want to make very, very clear here that when I talk about this stuff, I am not speaking on behalf of the CDP. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Credentials Committee. I'm one guy who is one of 25 members of the Credentials Committee, and these are personal opinions.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
All right. So in terms of the election in the 63, that you can't answer that as a yes or no question, right?
Why not?
The reason is that there were a number of people who in AD 63 and in other ADs who voted but were ineligible to vote. Now, the process in all of these ADEMs, and always it is this way and always has been this way, is that we don't demand verification of the voter unless someone challenges that voter, right? So someone can come in, they sign in, and once they've signed in, they receive a ballot. That ballot is anonymous, and then they cast that ballot. If a challenger has reason to believe that that person shouldn't be there, shouldn't be voting, they can challenge that person at the time. If after the fact they have reason to believe that that there were a large number of people who were voting ineligibly, within 7 days they can make a challenge, which is how the Credentials Committee hears these things. And that can be done, right?
Yeah.
So if you were to challenge every single ADEM across the state, you would very likely find some small percentage of ineligible voters. I mean, for natural reasons, right? People re-register at the DMV and they don't realize that they're now declined to state and they thought they were Democrat. They didn't realize that they lived 2 blocks away in another district. Like these things happen. In 80-60, in most of these, we heard challenges on the Credentials Committee for a variety of reasons from a variety of districts. But I think the ones that you're interested in, specifically 80-63, 80-41, there were an unusually large number of people who were ineligible who cast ballots.
Okay, let me stop you for 1 second, Dave, because I know we can go on. We talk about what's happened. I went to 5 ADEMs, and I can tell you right off the bat, these. Bottom line, they were a sham. I have video of a Trump supporter going and actually voting. But what is the purpose of your committee at the end of the day? Is it to get things right? Is it to get things straight? Because I when I get into these hearings, I see us going around in circles and circles and circles, and it just makes me think that the California Democratic Party and the Democratic Party as a whole still doesn't get it. They still can't run fair elections. Now, I just want to know plain and simple, without going through the whole process, are these elections fair or unfair? And what is your purpose and what is your job as a committee to do? Get it right or just kind of explain the inaccuracies and the malfeasance, as you said?
So, again, I don't speak for the Credentials Committee.
We know. We're speaking for yourself, Dave.
Right.
We understand that.
All right. So, kind of a complex question, but it's fairly simple to answer. So the charge of the Credentials Committee, as I understand it, is to do 2 things. One, to determine if, especially when you're talking about ADEM challenges, which is mostly what we're talking about here. So in the context of ADEM challenges, the job of the Credentials Committee is to determine whether there is enough evidence to warrant vacating some part of or all of the results of the election.
Yes.
All right.
Did you not have enough evidence in this case in 63? Because you yourself said you were appalled at every level, that it was broken on all sides, that there were institutional players taking advantage. We like to call them establishment players. And there was major malfeasance. You also stated that this was ground zero, 63, for the problems that take place in this ADEM elections. So why, in fact, did you not vote to have a fair election?
All right, I will absolutely explain that. So here's the thing. It depends on the district that we're talking about, but here's the thing. It is very clear that the ADEM process is now broken. We have had a process that has worked fairly well for quite some time, where in most cases, the organizers, whether they were establishment organizers or anti-establishment organizers, where for the most part, the rules were followed and there weren't that many people who came in and voted ineligibly.
When you say most part, what do you mean by most part? Well, some of the rules were applied, but I mean, that's this. Listen, David, I just want to, before you go any further, I just want you to understand where I'm coming from and where a lot of the Democratic people and the split between the progressives are. And I've said this to you before. There can be no unity without accountability. So when you get going, you say, for the most part, it stops most of my friends and most people in my clan who are saying, hey, the Democratic Party can't even run fair elections. Go ahead.
So two things to say about that. Number one, this idea that it serves the benefit of the establishment to not verify voters because the establishment is likely to cheat is actually really, really new.
Why is it new? Wait, why is that new? I mean, they have the money. They can bring people in. The progressives are poor. I mean, I don't know where you're saying it's new. I have always thought that the establishment types have a lot more money, and I see it, and they can do a lot more things, especially when there's a lot more avenues for them to cheat in these elections and maintain their power. Go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting.
That's fine. I understand that perspective. I'm just giving you the historical perspective. I don't know how long you've been watching these things, but I've been organizing and convening ADEMs for a long time.
That's why you're on here. That's why I wanted you.
Right. Okay. So here's the thing. Number one, we're the Democratic Party. We have a culture of trusting voters. We're not the voter ID party. So every time someone tries to bring up voter verification in this context, it smacks to some people of a Republican talking point that we don't trust voters. So that's number one. And I get that that's not going to be terribly persuasive to you, but it's important in terms of the historical culture of this thing.
Well, you did say to me about that. You did say to me that you thought that it was a lot of burners who didn't want the verification process. And that's where I was completely confused, because I think it's burners who want to make sure that these elections are fair and do whatever it takes at the end of the day.
This particular cycle, the talking point has been reversed. But historically speaking, and this goes all the way back to when the Dean folks were coming in and making the challenge, and then when Obama folks came in and they were the anti-establishment challengers, and even all the way up to the first Bernie wave of ADEM challengers back in 2017. Historically speaking, when people have wanted to have verification of the voters at the ADEMs, it has traditionally been establishment folks trying to implement the verifications and anti-establishment folks arguing back, because it was the establishment folks who were arguing that the anti-establishment crowd was bringing non-Democrats, just their crew of friends, Green Party types, not true blue Democrats. And it was the establishment folks who have historically, I'm not saying that's the way it is this cycle, but historically, it's been the establishment folks who have been asking for verification because they believed that anti-establishment forces were not bringing true blue Democrats to the table. Now, understandably, this cycle, it has been very much reversed, right? This cycle, you have a perception of establishment forces trying to take back over from more Dem socialist types and using untoward tactics to do so. And so now you have the progressive anti-establishment forces demanding the verification. But historically, that's not been the way it was.
Could I ask you a question about that? In your personal opinion, in a Democratic ADEM election, is it not fair to make sure that the people who are voting are in that district and they are registered Democrat? I mean, I don't know why this is such a hard thing to find out.
Right.
I mean, in your personal opinion, isn't it fair? I mean, I don't care what happens historically. I care what's fair right now. And so do my viewers, and so do my people on the MCSC network and the CONVO Couch network. They're screaming and they're saying it doesn't make it right what's historically happened. And you're in a position to say, hey, we're going to make this ship right.
Right. And so, understandably, right? So, the motion that carried, and most of my emotions, the ones that carried
Yeah.
in these cases, instructed the chair of the Credentials Committee to talk to the Rules Committee. It's kind of complicated language, but the force of it is to tell the Rules Committee that you need to look at verifying the voters. That this has now come to a point where these ADEMs are now broken, given the way these organizing tactics have gone, and that we actually now need to implement voter verification. So I absolutely agree. Like there is enough problems with enough unverified, with enough ineligible people coming to vote at these things now, that we now unfortunately need to go through the rigmarole of verification.
Why is that unfortunate, though? Well, I mean, seriously, because we talked about this outside. You had told me that these ADEM elections cost money, and people spend a pretty buck on them, and to make them longer, it would cost more money. But while we were having that conversation, Mr. Atkins, right next to us, the Democratic Party was holding a party in which they're spending close to $5,000 an hour. And I know this stuff because I'm in the food industry. I understand the liquor that was going out for free, the food that was going out for free, how much it cost to rent the room, and yet we can't get elections straight, but we can party like a rock star. Why can't we just simply spend the money and make sure these things are done right so democracy is held up true?
Sure, I don't necessarily disagree with that perspective. All I can tell you is two things as a volunteer, because the regional directors and the conveners, we're all volunteers. So let me try to demystify this a little bit and explain how these actually work. Because and first of all, I want to note that every dollar we spend, I can't speak to like parties and all.
I know that.
Stuff.
I know. Well, listen.
Yeah.
I'm not putting that on you, Dave. I know you're not calling those shots, but it's still the same thing we hear over and over again. Even in 2016, where Hillary Clinton took over the party because it was bankrupt, but yet they're doling out money for a fake dossier, hand over foot, and all these what are they, consultants getting millions and millions of dollars. I just want to point out the fact that when we're sitting in that room and we're kind of manufacturing some form of consent to cheat in a ways, saying that bottom line, we don't have the money yet, we're spending money elsewhere. I know you're not in charge of that, but I want you to at least acknowledge that we could find the money as Democrats if we wanted to, or you could find the money as Democrats to run these elections fair. That's all I'm saying.
Sure. I mean, I didn't. It's not about the money so much, actually, in terms of verification.
Then what's it about?
About other things. Yeah. So I'll explain. Okay.
Go ahead.
So the way these things are run is it's all done by volunteers, right? So you have for every assembly district in the state, the regional directors have 4 districts apiece, and the regional directors either serve as conveners themselves or appoint conveners. The conveners pay for the rooms and the copying charges, and they do that personally, out of personal pocket, and then they ask the CDP for reimbursement later if they choose to do so, but it's all completely out of pocket. Every single person who works the ADEM is a volunteer doing a thankless, difficult, grueling job that if they get it wrong, they get accused of malfeasance. But it's all completely volunteer. So what the convener has to do is find a room that is central in a central location, and they get all sorts of flack because people never think the locations are as central as they should be. They have to pay for that out of pocket. The staff, CDP staff, prepares all the ballots in advance. And I have to note, CDP staff is tired and overworked for the most part. So CDP staff prepares the ballots. They get them to the conveners like a week in advance at best, sometimes only days before. The conveners have to go print the ballots. You have to get a large number of volunteers, about 15 to 20 volunteers at least, to handle several shifts, because you have to have the sign-in shift, and then you have to have the counting shift. And then you have to have 2 people there to stamp hands and to do all sorts of other things. You have to get a large number of volunteers in order, and all these people are just doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. Remember. And you have to do that for every district. So in my case, for instance, I had to convene 4 districts, Saturday, Sunday, then 2 weeks later, another Saturday, Sunday. I had to organize all the volunteers for that, organize all the venue locations, do all the printing at FedEx, do all this stuff, bring everything.
Can I stop you on the printing stuff too as well? Because I know what you're saying, and I know what you're getting at, and I know you're saying that it's everybody's got to do this volunteer work, and it seems like we're just kind of like dosing around the fact that it's hard to run fair elections, and this is why I asked you that question, Dave.
Sure.
If you can't throw fair elections, then you shouldn't have delegates. The Republican Party doesn't have delegates, and if you guys can't be fair on your power structure, then you shouldn't have it. But let me ask you this question, since we're talking about printing, okay? Because you even said in your statement that you couldn't understand how somebody couldn't get these things printed. And when we're talking about all the thankless things we do in the committee that you were on and stuff, are we to believe as people that Maria Estrada's name was accidentally left off the ballot? Because that's a hard thing to sell right here. Rendon's #1 challenger, the person who won the jungle primary and took him to the wire, was accidentally left off the ballot. I mean, please try to explain that to me and sell that to me, because to me that is the biggest, most crookedest thing of this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, I cannot speak to intent. Again, CDP staff prepares the ballots. What I can say is this: if there were intent to disadvantage Maria Estrada by leaving her name off the Ybor ballot, what I can note is, first of all, this was not the only district this happened in.
It doesn't make it okay. It makes it even more. It makes things worse, Dave. So
no, I know, but it also speaks to intent, right? So what the question you asked was, do I believe that this could be a matter of inadvertence, or do I believe that it was actively corrupt? And what I'm saying is, if I cannot speak to that.
But isn't it enough to make wait, isn't it enough right there alone to say, hey, we got to do a fair election. We can't stand with these results from what happened. You know what I'm saying? I mean, her name was not even on the ballot. And we know, and let's make sure that we let our audience understand that if 20% of a slate, 20% of the ADEMs can block an automatic endorsement for the Speaker of the House, Anthony Rendon, to get the automatic endorsement. Am I right or wrong?
No. That multiple things are wrong about that, but one matter at a time. I want to cover one issue at a time.
All right.
Here.
Go ahead.
I'm
sorry.
That later.
The original question was her name being left off the ballot.
Right.
Wasn't that enough to strike another fair election?
No, but let me answer one question at a time.
Okay, all right, go. What question are you answering?
I want to finish here about why there hasn't been verification in the past.
Okay.
And then we'll go on to the specifics of AD 63.
Got it.
All right. So the reason there has been verification in the past is because oftentimes these ADEM elections are going in a lot of these districts all the way till 9 or 10 o'clock at night already.
So what?
You have because
democracy takes time. I don't understand why that's a problem. So what? As long as we get the right person in and the fair results, you could go till midnight like you were sitting in that room the other day. I saw you after midnight. Hey, it takes work to be a Democrat, but as long as we get it fair at the end of the day, please continue.
That's easy to say when you're not the one who has to schedule the room and you're not the volunteer. In most cases,
I'll do it for a fair election. I'll do it for the Republican Party for a fair election. I'll do anything to preserve my democracy. And if you're saying that you're not getting the right help, you're just simply not asking the right people.
I am agreeing with you that the process is broken and needs to be fixed and needs more resources thrown at it.
Thank you.
In fact, my motions were to do that. I'm just explaining the parameters of the problem here, right?
Okay.
There's nothing that establishment forces would like more than to break these ADEMs to such a point where you can't actually hold them in person and to where you have to do them online or some other way that makes it easy for them to win, right? The thing that most advantages progressives is to be able to continue to hold these caucuses in person. So what happens at them is you have a 2-hour window for people to sign in and vote. And oftentimes, even at the end of that 2-hour window, there's still a long line out the door, right? So if you add a verification component, that makes every single person signing in take a lot longer, right? And unless you double the number of volunteers and you make sure that every single volunteer is computer savvy and equipped and knows how to look people up appropriately in the system. It's just, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's a lot harder. Now, some folks are looking at reforms where instead of doing them on, say, 2, and I'm supporting these reforms, by the way, where a number of options are available, right? Where instead of doing it on 2 consecutive weekends or semi-consecutive weekends, you do them over a much longer period of time, where you actually hire more staffers to be able to go down and help do this. There's a number of options here. But the reason, I just want to make very, very clear that the reason we haven't been verifying in the past isn't because there's a corrupt intent or anything like that. It's literally that A, it hasn't really been a huge issue in the past. B, it's mostly been the establishment folks who have wanted verification against the progressive folks in the past. And C, it's a democratic value not to do voter ID kind of stuff. And D, most importantly, it has been in the past a logistical problem. These things already take longer than they should. Volunteers are exhausted. You can only hold rooms open for certain amounts of time. You can only hold the lines open for certain amounts of time. And so adding a verification component is something we've avoided for logistical reasons. But it is obvious now that there are enough ineligible people voting in enough districts because people are using careless, I'll say, organizing tactics, that we now have to institute verification procedures. And I agree with you. Like we need to be able to hold transparent and fair elections where everyone who is voting is eligible, and we don't have to go back through appeals processes to do it. So I'm agreeing with you, but I'm just explaining why this has not happened in the past.
Okay, that's cool. I still don't buy it, Dave, and I don't think a lot of my viewers buy it, but you made your point. Let's get to the second point. What's the second question you wanted to answer?
I think you were talking about something specific.
Was Maria Estrada's name left off the ballot enough to spark a decision, and it should it? And Dave, give us 1 second. I want to play a woman in your committee who said something. I want to play for my audience what she said. She grabbed the microphone and she hit this so on the nose, and a lot of people felt the same way. Listen to this, Dave.
We have to fix it up front, but I also have to say, and my colleague here, once fraud's been established, we've got to work on the standard. Once fraud has been established like that, we need to redo the election.
That's right.
I know that's something we have to work on, but I think it needs to be worked on. You mentioned checking with the rules chair. This is something that's coming out of this. We'll be sitting through here every time if there's not an expectation. Because I think that's prevented as well. Once people know, it's both things. It's on the front end, fix the check, but also it can still happen. And if it happens, people should expect that there'll be another election. And that kind of stops when people know that once you're caught, that we're going to, this rather changes the outcome. It's not setting what we want as our values.
Right there.
And I think we have to work on.
So we see this young lady talk, and she says, plain and simple, Dave, once fraud has been established, these elections are no bueno. Now, I want to get to something that you constantly say that just drives me crazy. Can you please explain to us, because we also have you talking, and you give us, first of all, do you want to say anything else before we continue to go on, or can I ask you another question?
No, go ahead. We're going to get into the details of 8063 now, so that's fine.
Okay, yeah. So we talk about this. There's something that you said that drives me crazy. And what this young lady said over here, was so on the nose. Once fraud has been established, we have to redo these elections. And I'm going to say this. You're going to say something here that drives me crazy. And you're going to talk about the math. And the math is the thing. And this is why I think the Democratic Party just does not get it. And I don't know why. And I don't know why you don't get this, because when you say the math, it's the same thing in 2016. When there's fraud that's been established, the math doesn't matter because the math is not right. It's not a fair election. So when you sit here and you throw these numbers, well, it doesn't change the math. No, the math doesn't mean anything when it's not a fair election. It then becomes fraud. Your thoughts?
All right. So first of all, you keep using the word fraud, but
a fraudulent election.
It's okay.
There were unfair voters. We can play the tape. There were many voters who vote. Let's let the audience know. There were many voters that were ineligible to vote, right? Whether they were shipped in from the establishment or whatever. We're not going to go into that, but they were ineligible. We found this. They redid the election in 51 because they found inaccuracies. However, despite Maria Estrada's name being left off the ballot, ineligible voters, we did not get a redo on this election. We did not get a free and fair election in 63. And yet, you guys keep on echoing the math. So go ahead.
All right. So there was a free and fair election, right? So it's very easy to throw around these words, but the math matters, and the math is important here, Because
were there ineligible voters?
There were ineligible voters.
So that's not a fair election. That's not a fair election. I can't let you off the hook there, my man. That's not a fair election. You're admitting that there were not eligible voters. Her name was left off the ballot. This was not a fair election.
So, okay, let me finish.
Go ahead.
All right. So you mentioned AD 41, right?
51.
51. I'm sorry. Yes.
Where they parked the bus right out front. 51.
Hang on. Yes. Let me.
I was there, Dave. I was there.
I know. Let me answer you. All right.
Ahead.
There's a lot of issues here. In AD 51, the Compliance Review Committee overturned the results of 10 of the 14 people who were elected, because you get 14 people elected at these things. Because why? Why did the CRC do that? The CRC overturned 10 of the 14 because of the math. The way the calculation works is, in any district, if you appeal any district, you're going to find some number in almost every case. There will be, because we don't do verifications, and that's why I moved to fix this, so we'll now do the verifications in all likelihood in the next cycles. But because there are no verifications, there will almost always be some small percentage of voters who, if you review the ballots, were ineligible. All right. So if you're throwing out every election that had any ineligible voters in it, you will throw them all out. All right. So the only
how many ineligible voters were there in 51? Do you know?
So,
was there a significant amount? Because we know in 63 there were a huge amount. What
matters in these cases is the differential between the 7th place, the top 7 of each gender category advance. The 8th is the runner-up who does not. So what matters is the math differential between the winners and the losers, the people who don't make it, right? And if the number of ineligible voters, if you assume that every ineligible voter voted for the winners, right? If the number of ineligible voters is greater than the margin of victory, then that win is voided, right? So that's what happened. In AD 51, there were enough ineligible voters to have called into question 10 of the 14 spots. Because if you assumed that all the ineligible voters voted for the winners and you took those votes away, then 10 of those 14 people would not have advanced. And so new elections were called by the CRC for those 10 spots. And in fact, anti-establishment slates, the Bernie Krat slates, if you will, or whatever, dominated on the second round. And the establishment-ish kind of folks, if you want to say it that way, politics are complicated, but they came back and they appealed that election. And the Credentials Committee, rather, overturned that appeal and validated the 10 folks who got elected in their place. That's how it's supposed to work, right? But if you throw out every election because there were any ineligible voters in it at all, well, you're going to throw out every single one of these elections. So
what you could do, wait 1 second, you throw out the elections and you run a fair elections. If this is something that's protested, like a specific case with 51 or 63, then you make sure you have enough people on both sides to run a fair election. And believe you me, you'll have enough help. You'll have enough people out there, because all we want is a fair and free democracy. So, when there's that many inaccuracies, including her name left off the ballot, I know what you're saying, David, and I want to say it's okay and believe you, because believe you me, I want the Democratic Party to get our shit together and really be Donald Trump. But from what you guys are doing on these committees and what you're telling me right now, it seems to me that it's just more of the same, and you're not recognizing the main cause of pain within the progressive movement of the parties. It's election integrity. Even people within the progressives are critical of Bernie Sanders for not addressing the Democratic Party's problems when it comes to elections. So we keep talking about this math, but when it's that high, at what point do we say, hey, we got to start over, we got to do this again, and we got to make sure it's done right, and we got to make sure it's done fair?
At the point at which the number of ineligible voters is great enough to have called into question the outcome of the election, right? Oh, that's the simple. And look,
we're never going to get here. We're never going to get there.
You're asking questions, and I'm answering you, right? So I agree that the process is broken enough that we now need to start verifying voters, right? So, but if we're looking at the elections that took place, so in 8063, right, the number, it was 8063 was actually one of the easiest cases to adjudicate.
No, it was easy for you. It was one of the hardest things for us to understand, because people in California, we want single payer health care. And I think you should let the audience know who's in Assembly District 63.
Anthony Rendon. But look,
do you understand? Wait, do you understand why, David? Though people here are like, they will not trust the Democratic Party. They want to leave the Democratic Party. They will not go back into the Democratic Party simply because this is happening in Rendon's district.
Man, I'm trying to answer your questions. Yeah. If you keep interrupting me, I cannot answer your questions.
I'm sorry, Dave. I just want to make sure we're staying on topic. You do talk for a long time, and I let you. So please, let's.
I understand.
Okay, go ahead.
Here's the thing. Yes, I understand where the frustration comes. I don't agree with everything Anthony Rendon has ever done by a long shot. Like I get it. I want single payer healthcare. Here's the thing though. In this district, Maria Estrada lost by 165 votes. The 7th place person had 300 votes. Maria Estrada had 135. All right. So there were 2 reviews of the ballots that were done by CDP staff. 110. So she lost by 165. There were 110 that were found to be ineligible. It's just not enough.
That's a lot. Now listen, that's almost 25% of the actual votes that somebody won, over 25%. That's a huge significant. Listen, Dave, you got 10, you got 12 ineligible. Throw them out. You got over 50. You better be doing another election. There was over 100, Dave. And that's why I understand what you're saying, and I don't want us to go do-si-do with the math. I think it's just a big part of the frustration. And, I'm
aware, but again, once you start down that path, once you start down the path of just winging it, you set a precedent where anytime there's any ineligible voters, someone tries to call into question. You have to have a formula, and the formula is very simple. There were a lot of people in 8063, the vast majority, who actually did vote legitimately, right? And they were eligible. And the reality of the situation is, even if you assumed that every single ineligible voter voted for the establishment, and there's actually absolutely no way to verify that or no reason to assume it, and I know you'll want to object to that, we'll get to that later, but the key thing here is, even if you took every single ineligible voter and took them away from the lowest winner and gave them to Maria Estrada, she didn't have the votes. And that's pretty cut and dry. You can't say we need to rehold this election because it was fraudulent, when it wasn't fraudulent. There were a number of people who voted inelligibly, but even if you took all the people who voted inelligibly out, she still loses.
Can I speak?
And that's the reality.
Yeah, but this is what we know. This is what we know of the cheating. What don't we know? And that number is ridiculously high, and I will still repeat the sentiment that her name wasn't even on the ballot. And if you're going to try to have people believe that the biggest opponent of Anthony Rendon was accidentally left off the ballot, that's a hard sell, my friend. And I think that and here's the shame about this whole situation, Dave.
Okay, can I say something very, very important?
Please
here,
please do.
Because people who don't know the situation are going to misjudge based on what you said there.
Go ahead,
please.
There are
2 ballots. One of them is an executive board ballot, and one of them is what we call the main ballot, where people vote for all the candidates. Okay. Then there's an executive board ballot with much fewer candidates. Ms. Estrada was left off the executive board ballot. She was not left off the main ballot. Estrada won 135 votes on the main ballot. She won 170 votes on the e-board ballot. That is where she had to be written in, right? So she was listed on the main ballot. That's where she got 135. She wasn't listed on the e-board. She got 170 for e-board. Either way, now, you can't serve on the e-board. And she lost the e-board election too, but you can't serve on the e-board if you don't win on the main ballot. But even that's irrelevant. Even if you were to say, let's give her 170 votes that she received at the e-board rather than the main, there still weren't enough ineligible votes. So yes, I absolutely agree that it's a problem that she was left off the executive board ballot, and I have no way of divining intent about that. I can just say it happened elsewhere too. And I can say that, in my district where it happened, we waited half an hour to start the election until we could make sure we got correct ballots printed. But there's still, let's not say she was left off. Let's not leave your viewers to imagine that she was left off the ballot and therefore people didn't vote for her or something. She was on the main ballot. She got 135 votes on the main ballot.
She was left off the other ballot.
She was left off the executive board ballot, and 170 people wrote in her name there. So she actually got more votes on the ballot that she was left off of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, once again, there's confusion. There is confusion in this whole election. But what you're saying is that we got it 50% right, so it's okay, and that's what I'm saying. It's not okay.
I'm not saying it's okay, but
are you saying it's not okay?
No, this gets into complications. But the e-board vote, as Chair Wagaman noted, the executive board election would have been vacated if she had qualified for executive board on the main ballot. But since she didn't qualify for executive board on the main ballot, then the e-board vote, it wouldn't have mattered because she's not eligible to serve. That having been said, even if you give her all the benefits of the doubt on this one, right? Even if you take her 170 votes from e-board and assume that's her tally when her actual tally is 135, there still weren't enough ineligible voters to change the outcome. And that's why the motion was what it was. There weren't enough votes.
Yeah. Well, listen, I know we can dance around this math all day, and I don't want to go into it anymore because I think you're set on your position. And I can say this election had nothing to do with Maria Estrada, but it did, however, have everything to do with election integrity, accountability, and the state of the Democratic Party and where they still are with their elections. And they just can't seem to get it right. And I'm a little upset by your decision, Dave, and that's why I wanted to have you on. I feel a lot of you people in the Credentials Committee had a chance to show some form of accountability, and you went the wrong way. That being said, though, with the future, what does Rusty Hicks plan to do to fix these situations? Because I've said to you, plain and simple, why don't we just eliminate these delegates? And after you tell me what Rusty Hicks' plan is, I want you to explain to my audience how the delegate process works. How many different delegates there are. There's a central committee, there's the ADEMs, and how many votes each they get.
Sure. Okay. So what I like to talk about here, first of all, I cannot speak for Rusty Hicks. My vote went to
Let's leave that out.
So what I can speak to is credentials and rules and what some folks are looking at, though obviously I don't speak for either committee and I don't know what's going to happen. But what I can say is this. The party sits on a stool with three legs, and very intentionally so. And it was not always this way. There weren't always ADEMs. ADEMs didn't always exist. There's a long history of reforms in the party to try to make the party more accountable to the grassroots. And the creation of ADEM caucuses was one of them.
Okay.
So it used to be basically all legislators and their appointees. And then you had central committees, and then you had ADEM. So now, in the current state of the party, there's an intentionally balanced set between the legislators and their appointees who get approximately 1/3 of the delegates.
Okay.
Central committees, representatives from the central committees, typically the elected members on the public ballot of the central committee, who are approximately 1/3.
So these are officials, you're saying, right?
No. So on county ballots, I'm sure you've seen this, down at the bottom of the ballot, used to be every 2 years, now it's every 4 years. Ever since the top two primary got enacted. There's elections on the main public ballot alongside the President of the United States and everybody else for your county central committee members.
Okay. So they get votes in this endorsement process, right?
Those folks.
Yes.
The endorsement process, they're delegates to the state party.
Yes.
Those folks are about 1/3 of the delegates, right? And then there are these ADEMs, and ADEMs are elected at caucuses that take place every 2 years in odd numbered years. The reason the ADEMs were created was sort of as a grassroots release valve, right? If there's a perception that the legislators and the central committees are dominated by establishment forces who aren't allowing authentic grassroots voices in the party to be heard, then the ADEM caucuses, in theory, are a release valve that allows grassroots activists to bring out all their grassroots supporters and have a voice in the process. And that tends to work fairly well. And those folks are supposed to be a third of the party. And the numbers are adjusted in order to maintain that balance, by the way. So as population has grown in California, more and more people from the Central Committee side exist because it's a formula by the Central Committee folks are done by a formula of how many
So the Central Committee is the people elected on the ballots, the actual ballots you go to every 4 years. Down on the bottom, you said the Central Committee or no?
Correct. That's
okay.
Central Committee, right?
Now,
and
let me ask you a question, though.
Yeah,
go ahead.
sure.
Let me ask you a couple questions because you can speak all day, and I love that.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I love that about you. That's why you're on the show and stuff. And even though we disagree, we can have these conversations, and these are important right now. So the ADEMs are the people, the 7 men, 7 women elected below. Their vote is one vote, one person, one vote, right?
Correct.
The Central Committee, are they one person, one vote, or does their vote count more?
No, it's one person, one vote. So
all the delegates are one person, one vote.
Correct. Yeah.
First, second, third.
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
You said there's three sets of delegates, right?
Yeah, sure. Legislators, and there's a handful of others as well, but yeah, basically three legs of the stool.
So legislative only gets one vote for Rusty Hicks. Anthony Rendon got one vote. He doesn't get 30 votes. Nothing like
that. This is complicated, and like I said, there are a few categories of other people, including DNC members, that leaders of the party, the Speaker of the Assembly, the leader of the state Senate, etc., get 30 appointees at large each. But
super delegates,
yes, basically. That's not the right term for them.
Is it, Dave? No. I'm not trying to get you. Listen, I just want to explain this process because when we talk about eliminating superdelegates, people go apeshit crazy, but we still have it within our Democratic Party here in California.
Do you want to know why? Do you want me to explain
why? I
would
love, and my audience would love to know why David Atkins thinks why. Go ahead.
All right, let me explain why these people exist for you. One thing that tends to happen with some of the newer activists is they assume that everything that's come before it was because of stupidity or corruption, and it ignores a very long history of very hard-fought reforms through blood, sweat, and tears. So let me explain why. Let me explain what we're talking about and why, right?
Go ahead.
So everyone gets one vote, right? Legislators get a number of appointees depending on who they are. Like Congress members get more appointees than Assembly members, and those folks get more appointees than just the Democrat who won the primary but didn't win the general, et cetera.
Yes.
And so central committees get a certain number of people depending on the size of the county, right? And then the ADEMs is 14 people for every assembly district. All right. So there are also these categories of DNC members, regional directors, of which I'm one. We're also added to the mix.
Mm-hmm.
And then the leadership gets 90 people. And this has really infuriated people for
90
a few years.
90 to 1. That's not super, but go ahead, baby. I love it.
It's 90, and keep in mind it's 90 out of 3,300. So we're not talking about that many people here.
That's still a lot of percentage. 90 is still a lot. Go ahead.
Let me explain why these folks exist. Okay, so back in the day, this was actually a progressive compromise. I know you're going to have a hard time believing this, but this was a progressive compromise that I and a lot of other people fought for against the establishment for a long time to achieve.
And what happened to you? You left us, man.
Come
back.
No.
I just want to let you know for doing this interview, and I know my MCSC audience is going to go crazy when I say this, Dave. I still going to have a life raft after you when the progressives take over this complete party. I'm not going to let you drown. I'm going to get you back in the boat with us and get you on point. It's just a shame that some of your new friends out there have left us, and they're not getting that same lifeboat. I don't know if I'm going to throw it out for Mark Gonzalez, but for you doing this interview, I might throw you a lifeboat. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just want to demystify and explain this stuff. Okay.
I don't know if you're demystifying it, but you're I don't know what we're fucking doing here, but
that's okay.
But let's go ahead.
I was a Bernie supporter, right?
You were. And what happened? But anyways, let's talk about this. We're talking about not the right term, superdelegate, but the elected officials. We're talking about 90 to 1, 30 to 1, whatnot, and stuff. Because I have a very important question for you when you're ready.
Back in the bad old days, legislators could appoint people anywhere. So remember, I said that legislators get a certain number of appointees, right? And the number depends on who they are. I think Congress members get 6 or something. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's basically 6, 5, 4, 2, whatever. Okay. So they used to be able to appoint them literally anywhere in the state with all the privileges thereto pertaining. And what that meant was if the Speaker of the Assembly wanted to throw an endorsement in a district, right? If the Speaker felt like one of his people was being threatened, or if there was an open seat and he wanted to, put his fingers on the scale there, all he had to do was tell all of his members in the Assembly and the State Senate. Well, the State Senate would do its own thing, right? But all he had to do was tell all his members, I need you to appoint all your people here, right? And then they could overwhelm any endorsement process that took place in that district. And that happened quite frequently. And that annoyed both the progressive activists, who didn't like the fact that the Speaker was basically throwing any endorsement in their territory if he wanted to put his hand on it.
Of course, it would infuriate me, and it still does.
Correct. But it also annoyed the legislators, too, because they didn't like having to, be told what to do, and then they had to rejigger all their appointments. It was bad for everybody. It was only good for the Speaker. So the progressives wanted to battle that and wanted to say, look, we're not going to allow you to appoint people outside your district. And if you do appoint people outside your district for whatever reason, those people shouldn't be able to vote in endorsement processes. That fight was years of blood, sweat, and tears by progressive reformer activists, including myself and dozens and dozens and dozens of others, to change the rules to prevent that. The compromise that was achieved was that legislators were prevented from doing that. They can still appoint half their people from outside the district, but if they do, those people don't get to affect endorsement processes. But the compromise that was achieved was, in exchange, leadership would get just 90 people. So, and the idea behind this was sort of to prevent sort of what has often been called a LaRouche phenomenon.
Dave,
right?
I got to tell you, I don't know if I would send you in for a compromisation to try to get some compromise, because 90, you still gave them 90. And listen, I don't want to doubt the work that's done in the past, that it might have been worse than it is now. What
Sure.
I'm trying to say is that it's still not okay. It's still not good. And if we don't get our shit straight, we're going to have Trump again, because nothing here really seems to make sense to me when we talk a lot of these things. For instance, let me just ask you a question real quick, and not to interrupt you. I think the blood, sweat, and tears, you got it out. Who got more ADEM votes? Kimberly Ellis or Rusty Hicks?
I can't even begin to tally that, but I think probably Kimberly. I think it was probably, I think the ADEMs were majority for Kimberly. I think the Central Committees were probably split. The legislators were majority for Rusty, something like that.
You understand why we see people out here say, like, once again, the Democratic Party it doesn't have elections. They have selections, and they grab people and they put people in these positions. And a lot of people feel that with Rusty Hicks as the chair, we're not going to get any closer. It's a single payer. He was tapped by Rendon, and the whole process. I really wish you would have made a different decision there. And had another election. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to just cut you off, but we are running out of time, Dave. And I still say this now, the Democratic Party has a lot of work to do. From what we saw over the weekend, I was not satisfied. As a matter of fact, I'm a little disheartened. And I don't know, Dave.
Let me just say, we did move over and over again to tell the Rules Committee to institute verification procedures going forward, because it's obvious that this process needs to be changed. I think we're going to be devoting more resources to this, to these elections going forward, to make sure that they're transparent and that people can trust in the system. And all I can say about all the decisions that we made and the challenges is you revert back to a math-based formula where you overturn an election if there were enough ineligible voters to have made the difference in the outcome, and you don't overturn it if there wasn't. And those are the decisions that were made.
All right, I'm going to let you get the last word there, even though it's about your math, and it just drives me batshit crazy when you talk math, when we don't have a fair election, in my personal opinion, and I know you think a little bit differently. But once again, David, I'm going to say it. Thank you for taking this interview. A lot of people wouldn't have done that. A lot of your colleagues have been avoiding us when they see us nowadays. But I also just want to point out that today is June 8th, and today is a kind of special day in my heart, because today the USS Liberty, 52 years ago, was under attack. Actually, a United States ship by Israeli forces. And when they got back to the States, there was a big suppression of journalists were kept quiet and they weren't able to speak their mind and talk about what's going out there. But I will tell you this much, Dave, you can count on me, you can count on the Convo crew to continue to show up with our cameras, our microphones, to hold the Democratic Party accountable. Thank you again for taking the interview, David.
Of course. Yeah, sure.
We'll see you soon. Thank you for watching the Convo Couch. I am Pasta Jardula. Convo out.